I do not believe so.
And we will be using the 2 executive sessions. And just for context, we will do the real estate related one first, and then the evaluation second.
Okay, I'll make a motion to accept the agenda. A second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. So under our community engagement topics this week, the facilities needs assessment and planning. You have the floor.
All right, thank you. Doug and Sarah, do you want to introduce what we've done? Do you want me to introduce a little bit about where we're at? And why everybody's here? All right, well, we've been meeting as a facilities team. We met a couple times in the past few weeks to talk about our needs as far as district facilities and grounds, and we've put together a comprehensive list of everything we think is in need of maintenance or improvement. And then we've delineated out a list of things that really need to be taken care of in the now. So Jonathan Gottway is here, the Director of Buildings and Grounds, and he was going to run through the documents that were in your board packets, and then we'll go from there with discussion. Did I miss anything?
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Last time I was here, I think it was in the spring, and we did kind of a 30,000-foot overview of deferred maintenance and some kind of very general concepts about how to address what at the time seemed a bit overwhelming. And so I'll just kind of go through quickly, not everything we talked about in the subcommittee meetings, but some general considerations. I went through the 2012 assessment that was done, looked through what records I have, looked at the notes from the state facilities audit, and put together a list of the significant deferred items that we could quantify and address. What is not included in that list are kind of aspirational big projects. We're not talking about the district art center. We're talking about stuff that buildings and facilities need now. I did not take into consideration for this exercise any planned programmatic changes to the building. From my perspective for this exercise, the middle school is the middle school is the middle school for as long as we're here. I also did not take into account, even though it is a genuine consideration, changes to student demographics, because there's all kinds of decisions that get made around that issue that will impact the burden on this facility or that. I didn't look at facilities upgrades that would logically be captured by larger projects. And the example I use, because it's a simple one, is that the gym at the high school desperately needs a new sound system. But if we're going to talk about a gymnasium renovation, that sound system should be done there. So I didn't call that out separately. Obviously, normal operating and maintenance costs and efforts are not included in this. This is kind of extraordinary to that. The current renovation at the tech is out. That's winding down as we speak. And then a couple other things I didn't make a consideration, although I think we should, for general energy efficiency and kind of the carbon footprint of the district. My thinking is that's kind of an overriding consideration that should hit each and every one of these. independently, but it factors in differently. There's a huge distinction there between, you know, a restroom upgrade and replacing a heating system. We should go where there's the most bang for the buck. And then finally, I didn't, although, you know, we have these conversations all the time with principals and different program folks, this doesn't include programmatic upgrades or kind of what I call aspirational projects, the things that people would like to do to improve the programs or augment the programs that we have. This really, the goal here is to put our facilities in a position to support the programs we have as best we can. Kind of in keeping with that, as I go through this, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on how we got to where we are, other than being informed by that and not repeating some patterns. No need. I'm also didn't do, other than kind of conversations with colleagues in other areas, do any comparison with other districts or supervisory unions, because I don't think I'm really interested in being worse than someone else and just like do what we do, right? So with all that having been said, let's take questions. I'll just dive right into the short list.
So if you would.
Yeah.
For all of us, including those in the media that might be watching, as you get into your spreadsheet, abbreviations are
Yeah,
something.
I'll start off with that.
Great.
So to introduce, there's two spreadsheets you were given. One is kind of the deferred maintenance priorities. That's exactly what it is actually. The other is the larger set. The priorities I've attached numbers to, just as working numbers for budgeting purposes. And then in the subcommittee, when we looked at the whole list, we realized very quickly there's a need to break it down with some definable metrics. And what we used there was life safety, which is LS, regulatory issues, that column, and then what I call deferred maintenance liability, which is an issue, a situation that is the cost is going to increase exponentially as opposed to just inflation. Does that make sense? So those three in there, they're kind of equally weighted, but one could argue if there's two or more, they get a little bit of a bump. That having been said, the caveat is there are some items on the larger list that are fairly significant safety concerns that didn't make this list because there's just so much to do. I don't want to lose track of those. Does that answer your question about abbreviations?
And if folks are out in the cyber space, these documents are in the Google folder that's posted with the agenda on the website. Probably easier to look at that than try to see the screen. Just can't fit it all on the screen.
So one quick note before I start, as I'm sure you're aware, this summer we had inspections by the local fire marshal and the state electrical inspector, and they made note of some fairly serious issues that warrant immediate attention. So there's some stuff on here that is driven by that kind of this double whammy of life safety and regulatory. It's stuff we're going to do because they said we're going to do. And I can address the specific regulatory requirements if needed, but it's kind of where we're at. So with that having been said, you know, these are just kind of sorted by priority, not really by facility. The maintenance shop office location, that old concrete barn and the adjacent garage, the fire marshal and electrical inspector just shut it down. You may not use it until further use. So I'm in the process of getting estimates on what it would take to turn that space into usable space. That's a work in progress. We've got to do something with it. The thought right now is that maintenance barn could potentially become just storage space, just controlled storage. It's frankly probably going to be not vital space. And then the 3-bay garage to the right of it with some considerable work could just become our primary maintenance garage and workspace. So that's what that is. But there's some considerations. It doesn't have an independent water service. It doesn't have a sewer line out of it. there's some work to do. So that's there. Storage is on here for the same reason. Converting that old maintenance barn. We own a barn down at the Watson Park that I'm not quite sure why, but so I've been working on cleaning that out.
No one
And
explains.
I reached out to the rec department last summer, and now that there's summer programs that went on down, we'll regroup, because they use it somewhat too, and I don't want to adversely impact their program, but it's a sizable chunk of safe, secure space that we should be using in some way. And then there's some other spots around the district that could be improved and used for storage. Storage is an expensive proposition, and frankly, inappropriate storage got us into some problems with the fire marshal in the state. So I'm just going to try to head that off by being proactive. That's why that's on this list. At the fitness center, exterior door replacement hit the list. It's not a big number, but it is an immediate need. The door that goes out towards the west side is just simply needs to be replaced. It's also, I don't know how this happened, it's not ADA compliant, and it really should be. In the tech, kitchen hood suppression system needs to be reconfigured and upgraded, just code issues. There's a series of a greenhouse and some sheds out on the west side of the tech that I think just is kind of grown up organically over the years and needs some help to be made really viable as a space we can use either for storage or instruction or some combination. I'll work with the leadership over there to make that happen. The auditorium project has been kind of percolating for quite some time. We did have a third party, fire safety engineer come in and do an assessment and provide some recommendations. And there's a lot of work to do. It's a big project, and it's complicated by how much use that space gets. You can't just shut it down for a season. So there's going to be I'm collecting specifications and pricing for the various components. And as those components come together, and I know how much time they're going to take, we're going to have to kind of work in and around the program schedule so that we can move forward in a way that is productive and measurable without throwing them out of the building for example. And that's one that we just simply have no choice. We need a smoke evac system. We need new curtains. We need egress lighting. The code requires that the house lights and sound system have an interface with the fire alarm system. They don't. We just got to do it. Stairwell egress, mechanical room, catacombs assessment that came out of the state inspection, where we've modified our stairwells and egress areas, entries, exits many times over the years. So some of it's very simple. A door that swings the wrong way needs to be replaced. Some of it's more complicated. The one that we scratched our heads about, and now the architect is scratching their collective heads about, is where you leave the high school towards the glass hallway. There's a stairwell down on one side, a stairwell down on the other way. There's, it goes out to the hallway. There's just a whole bunch of conflicting codes there. And I could not provide the answer. So we hired an architect to provide those answers. The amount of work that is required is kind of TBD. Similarly, the catacombs under the high school, that's mechanical space. Everyone who's looked at it says it's mechanical space. It needs to be delineated and treated as such. Because we've gone so far down the road, they required that we hire an architect to make a code assessment and tell us what we must do. So that's in progress. Same situation with classroom electrical hazards. The state electrical inspector has us having a master electrician go through every classroom to make sure that they are up to code and suitable. And that's underway, but that is going to take some time. That's going to be a process. The fire alarm and sprinkler system, and we've talked about this before in the high school and the tech, they've reached the end of their useful life, and then we've used them some more. Now, here's the thing though, they are fully inspected and fully operational. And I say this all the time, I give this speech all the time. There's a big difference between a risk and a hazard. We're operating at risk and we're managing that risk through inspection and maintenance. It's not a hazard. However, it's not the code and they need it fixed. So most recently, the fire marshal said, because they can, you will get conditional occupancy for the best room based on you putting a scope of work and a plan for the fire alarm system in my hand within 90 days. And I said, okay. So, so we've brought an engineer on to design that system. And, you know, they're using that as a hammer of sorts, but I don't blame them. And we need to do it anyway. So we've hired an engineer to design the fire alarm system so that we put out to bid. The fire marshal and the state have agreed that because of the size of the facility, we can phase that work if we need to, both because of the financial implications and also just because of the programmatic. We can't shut the school down for 6 months to do it all. And they're fine with that. They want a reasonable plan. Same situation with the sprinkler system. It's inspected, tested, fully functional, and doesn't need code. So we're managing the risk appropriately, and we need to move forward with it. So that's the engineering firm that's doing the design for the fire alarm system. I've got a proposal to do a design for the sprinkler system because frankly, a lot of the groundwork will already have been done. So they can use their own site surveys and data. And you know, it's still an expensive process, but at least it's some of those costs are offset by the initial effort. And we have a unified system when we're done. Let's see. Electrical panel, sub panel. At last count, there are 42 electrical sub panels in the high school of every generation imaginable. The electrical inspector went through a half dozen with me and said, I'm not gonna bury you. You've got enough to do. I'm just gonna trust that you have an electrician look at this within 90 days, send me a letter saying what your plan is, and as long as you execute that plan, we're good. So that's what we're doing. But it's a lot of work, and that too, you can't just, you know, I can't just show up in high school, start throwing breakers in this college. So I'd like to give him at least a week's notice. So where we're at right now is I do have an electrician. In fact, who's in there today with one of the suppliers going through, looking at what we're going to need for parts and pieces, and then we'll talk about how we phase it. And again, it's about retaining credibility of a good plan. So that's a work in progress. We have the moving to the middle school. The elevator controls are original to the building. We just need to replace them. That's an easy conversation. Finishes right there. We have the same classroom and panel issues in the middle school that we have in high school. So we need to address those. The chimney replacement in the middle school, the number 2 boilers in the basement currently cannot both be fired at once because the chimney has been lined and is too small. If we try to fire them both, it will overpressurize and cause leaks, which is unacceptable. The chimney simply needs to be rebuilt. It has needed that for some time. So we hired an engineer, Du Bois King, to design that new chimney. They've done that. I have that on my desk now. I'm meeting with them next week to talk about an RFP to get that out on the street and see where we come in. The chimney itself is a sizable project. It also goes right up to the middle of the building. So there's going to be quite substantial demolition, probably some abatement, and then we have to put it back in a way that makes sense. And this is one of those that, you know, when I talked about this project with the principal over there, I said, well, is that going to fix our heating problem? I said, absolutely not. It's going to do nothing for your heating in terms of comfort, efficiency, or anything. All it's going to do is give us a safe and functional exhaust for the existing boilers. That having been said, the new chimney, part of the basis of design was that it will work with any heat source we might put in the building. If we make a move to get away from number 2 and go to condensing propane boilers, which are much more efficient and cleaner, that chimney will take care of those too. So we're trying very hard to make these forward steps not come with the half step or more backwards. Moving over to Adequachi, North End drainage, we talked about that too, that the hill drains into the end of the building, and it has for literally as long as the building's been there, and we've reached the point where we have to address it. That is a little bit complicated because in the interim, they've done a whole bunch of landscaping and stuff on that end of the building, and we are in a stormwater collection area. So that's gonna be a little tricky, but it needs to be done. The RRC, simple one, it's on here because it's just a straight up regulatory and life safety. We need to replace the range hood suppression system in their learning kitchen there. Just doesn't work. At Tenney House, it took a little figuring, but basically we have a drainage problem, and the drainage for everything to the west of Tenney in that lot drains through the basement of Tenney House, which is less than ideal for a number of reasons. One being it is undermining the foundation, the other being it floods the basement, makes it continuously wet. Either one is acceptable. That involves both structural repair to the foundation itself, which is not. It's a mix. Some of it's poured, some of it's dry, some of it's dry that was then poured around it. Some of it's try some of that. So it's going to be a little tricky, and it's going to involve drainage. And depending on how far we have to go, if I have to remove that ramp that's on there now, it has to be replaced with an ADA compliant ramp, which is, I'm going to try to not kick that dog, but if we do, we do. And we're not going to put it back in a way that's not compliant. The Wilder School has no security system, which I think we talked about that very briefly, because it doesn't really need much more conversation than that. There's just no security system. All of the schools, with the exception of Wilder, because it was just built, and White River Elementary, because of the recent renovation, addressed some, but not all of these concerns. We put in a consideration, and it's the same note for everything. Either the fixtures are end of life or original to the building, and the effort is to establish district standards for targeted renovations and upgrades that get us to ADA compliant and the gender diverse restrooms in the schools. And I think the only reasonable way to do that is to start. So, for instance, at Dothan Brook, we would take one set of restrooms, probably on the first floor, because that sets us up for success on the second floor. We would do a design, we would execute that project, and then I would come back to you next year and say, hey, you can do it for $245, or oops, it costs $350. But we have to just start. We have to, it's not something we can avoid. And that is true at Dothan Brook, it's true at high school. It's true at middle school, it's true about teaching, because the same concerns. I think it makes sense to address them concurrently, the idea being to establish a district-wide standard for that effort. What else do I have? Oh, moving back to Tenney. So Tenney House is interesting, it's a repurposed residential structure. The program that's in there has quite a few people in the building, I understand. More than the one restroom fixture on the first floor supports. So there was a restroom on the second floor that I don't even know, it doesn't work. The pipes are all out. It was torn out some time ago. When I arrived, there were still fixtures in that restroom, but I removed them because the drains were compromised. So we needed a new restroom in the building if we're going to occupy it in that way. Similarly, right now they use that space for educational purposes, and one of the challenges of repurposing residential buildings is they have pre-K kids in there, and that means we have to register with the state-led essential maintenance practices. That means we have to register as early childhood. That means we need to look at the density of use, the number of them in there, potentially second floor emergency egress and a fire alarm system. So, to be completely honest there, one of the things I'm looking at is, as I look at the maintenance complex there, those two buildings, and Tenney House, there's a tipping point, right? Where we're putting so much into those that we need another consideration. But right now, today, I have to move forward. So I'm moving forward with the understanding that we're going to continue to use that space as it is used, which means we have enough occupants to warrant a second restroom. It means we're using it for educational space and all the requirements there. It means we're going to fix the foundation, we're going to fix the drainage, we're going to fix the ramp, we're going to make it. So it could be that as we, develop those projects and start to look at the whole nut, somebody says, wait a minute, let's think about plan B. But the only way to really do that responsibly is to go through the exercise. And then,
Just to clarify, the question there is, are we gonna spend more money than the value of the buildings?
well, it's a little bit.
I know, I mean,
Well, so here's the thing, it's a little bit, yes, but there's a little bit of complexity to it, because it's not just the value of the building, it's the value of the space in relation to other spaces.
Mhm.
So, I mean, Thomas heard this speech, forgive me, I don't think we have a space problem, I think we have a space allocation.
Mhm.
And that's often a more difficult problem to solve, because that's about people and priorities. And anywhere I've ever worked, that's a tough conversation to have. It's very easy to be acquisitional in terms of space. It's very hard to manage space. So yes, the value of the building, but it's also what does the program need for support? What's the right home for that program? What's the right, could we talked about this very briefly this afternoon, could we look at it holistically and say, well, I've got a footprint, need maintenance in 3 or 4 different places right now. I should probably think about consolidating. And so do we look at the space? And this kind of goes to your question or your statement. If we get to the point and that number becomes so large that we need to look hard at it, part of that consideration has to be, wait a minute, let's get outside the box here. If we don't have that many people and we don't need a second restroom, if it's not a public facing space that needs a part, should we look at space allocation rather than just try to force a round peg into a square hole? It's not just about property values.
the main reason I asked is those properties are contingent, correct? The maintenance barn that's been condemned and Tenney House are all kind of right together.
Yes.
Like, is that land that would be appropriate for new construction? I didn't say it out loud.
Well, I think.
I'm just asking, just because
So
if they're all there
we've talked
together.
about- We've talked in the facilities group about very long term, thinking about the whole footprint on that street, right? Where a couple houses, the superintendent's office, and potentially the corner. Way down the road, absolutely.
This is the opposite side though, right? This is closer to the high school parking lot. Okay,
But
just making
but
sure.
the thinking has been.
Yeah.
On the highest level, that whole footprint.
Of course.
But yes, those properties are more intimately linked than even I knew. When I started looking into it, I learned there is no water service to the maintenance barn. The line that a very enterprising farmer put in the ground in the 50s is still where we get our water from now. So there's no water here for that building. That doesn't mean we don't have water. It just means it's metered through the basement of the Tenney House.
Okay.
So yeah, it is all one footprint.
Okay.
And the other consideration here, although it didn't make the priority list, it's on the larger list, is sometimes sooner rather than later. And I don't mean 5 years from now, we have to address the concrete stairwell off the north side of the tech and this whole stormwater system there. And I don't know where those calculations are gonna land us. We have those 2 retention ponds right below the parking lot and then right below Tenney House that slow down the water coming off the parking lot. Whether that is enough space to slow down the water coming off the roof of the building, I don't know, roof of the high school, I don't know. So I would be fairly conservative in long-term planning for that space until we had a handle on our stormwater situation. Not just, you can do anything you want. Right?
Sure.
You can build anything anywhere, again, I'm not back line. But I think it would be prudent to keep in mind some of these other issues, even though they're not on the immediate priorities list.
So in theory, that lot is not immediately suitable for new construction.
Not without the engineering work to understand the stormwater of the adjacent space.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to put something new
Of course.
Yeah.
Where you're gonna wanna have a.
where
pond.
you might have to. Yeah, where you
Yeah.
might have to. I mean, there are 2 existing ponds, one to the side behind the student parking lot and one in front of Tenney, closer to the Route 5. Whether those are sufficient or not, that's what we
That
need to
remains
find
be
out.
seen.
Right.
But the really going back up to, where was I before, 30,000, go to 40,000. if you looked at that whole front lot, that, as I have termed it, the front lot,
Mhm.
where a couple house and superintendents and those other, down the road, if there is some impetus to build some sort of regional arts complex, in all likelihood, we're gonna have to adjust the access road. We might move the road, we're gonna have to
Yeah.
adjust parking. So I wouldn't wanna put down too deep a set of roots there until we had a real master plan in mind. If that makes sense. Not to rule anything out, but not to put anything in the way. I have kind of a burr on my saddle about taking stuff backwards.
No, yeah. Why do it twice if you can do it right?
Well, that's been part of the, the problem prior to, COVID.
Sorry, I don't have a phone number.
And looking.
And Siri wants to weigh in.
Siri. And looking at the historical implications, that footprint you're referring to happens to be part of the oldest part of the town. And so there's another piece to that puzzle, as far as how do we massage any activity of renovation around that, as well.
Does our property start from the light and go all the way to accept that house at the corner? Is that everything district property?
Yeah.
Yeah, but the house on the corner before you turn to the middle school, those two homes are private residents, and then it
Right.
goes back to district
Right.
property. Okay,
Right.
I just want to make sure I knew what I was
Yeah,
thinking.
and our property really starts at the second light. The first light is state property.
State.
Oh, right,
State-
yeah, I
from the
meant,
first light to the second is really state
Yeah.
In fact, even
property.
the far side of the road is
Yeah.
the state right away.
Right.
You can see,
Because they
Yeah.
go 26 feet.
Yeah.
from the-
6 or 8 feet onto Covell's front lawn is technically town.
Yeah, that's a
It's a
town
little
road.
odd.
right, because there's residents all the long,
Correct.
yeah.
Which is, to my point about if there is down the road some large scale, purpose driven redevelopment of that site, we're probably gonna be looking at access roads and parking.
Mhm.
We're gonna have to do it within our own footprint.
Right.
Hmm.
That's,
Yeah, that little median as you turn into the high school, middle school is state, I believe. State property. There's a couple trees on it.
so.
Goes further than you'd think.
Yeah.
There's
But the sign, the happy birthday sign is
oh, yeah,
our
that's
property,
ours.
and everything on that side.
Yeah.
It's fun to
On
see.
both sides.
Everything on that side of this access road belongs to us until you get to those private
Yeah.
residences.
Right.
Right.
So with all of that having been discussed, albeit briefly, kind of the working number was just over 5 million. That's this year. I had a contingency because I'm still a recovering builder and I always had contingency. That's how life works. The other thing I want to add here, although I didn't put a number on it, this is my pitch for programs. It's a little bit out of my swim lane. But I do feel like if we're going to take on a big bite like this in the schools, we should give some consideration, either in terms of funding or priority, to the program support I did not consider here. Because if I go talk to principals and say I'm spending $5 million and you get nothing but bathrooms, they're quite understandably upset. Something else.
Yeah.
So that's just my plug. That's where it is.
Jonathan,
Yeah.
first of all, thank you for doing a great job,
Mhm,
really.
definitely.
The first 20 items on the list are all being driven by some type of outside regulatory agency, correct?
No.
Technically,
No, North End Drainage is not. So there's a difference between being driven like a mandate. So the work in high school, the electrical work, that's in writing. That's, the state electrical inspector has my cell phone number, calls me every week to see how we're doing.
but they're technically their life safety issues.
Correct. But like the chimney, there are regulations around ventilation
Right,
for combustion, but there's not a regulatory hammer about to fall. It's just compliance. So there's some nuance there.
or it backfires and something horrible happens to some child.
Well,
Because
Hazard
mean,
risk,
obviously-
hazard risk.
you and I and Tom and now Sarah have been looking at this list for a long time. When I see the figure 5,248. Doesn't surprise me in the least.
A
Um,
million.
to have contingency funds of $787,200 doesn't bother me in the least, because I've been bugging you all for close to a year to come up with these numbers. The number I'm still missing is what you all are going to consider the dollar figure, so that it goes into whatever description of a pot that Jacob's going to have that gets budgeted every year to deal with some of these issues.
So, an important consideration, and I alluded to it earlier, this doesn't include regular operations.
Right.
Part of what I consider as regular operations, and maybe you don't or want to consider otherwise, is this doesn't include, for instance, the soft costs associated with designing the replacement for the rooftop equipment on the middle school. That's going to have to be done in advance, preferably at least a year in advance. But that's not carried as a capital expense, because that's something that I have to work into my regular operations. So in thinking about this as a holistic approach to avoiding this kind of long-term deferred maintenance problem, we need an operating budget that not just supports the reasonable operation and maintenance of facilities, but gives me the resources to plan. I need to be able to hire the engineer to design that before it hits this list.
We can't ignore this. I mean, we've been ignoring it because of COVID, and now it's come back to haunt us. And if we keep continuing, our buildings are going to start to crumble. And the draw of the outside wanting to send their children here starts going down the tubes. So I guess I'll just stress to the board, and I'm a cheap SOB to begin with, I admit it. And I have to tell you, this figure doesn't surprise me whatsoever, and I totally support it. I know it's going to be a big hunk for the citizens of this town, but I have no problem
So
standing up and defending it.
thank you. So, the other point, we talked about this a little bit the other day. When you look at this immediate list that we just went through, and then you look at the larger list behind it, that what I've called worksheet, because it really is just that, it's a work in progress. Everything on there has work to be done. This is an iterative process. We're going to do this again in a year. And the number we're talking about today is going to be similar for the next number of years.
That's true.
5-6 years. Because
And that's the part where we need to start educating the public.
Yeah.
It's $30 million.
This is what we've got to deal
And
with
the thing
today.
is,
And
we've been here before.
Yeah.
Okay, and the process hadn't been interrupted before. So if we were talking about what did not get done along the way, most of us would be heading for the door, because that number would have been staggering. So keeping in mind that this community has found a way to support, its schools, and when I say that, that's the infrastructure of our schools as well. As long as it's thoughtful and clear, as to why, it's understandable. Is it easy? No. Do people want to write an automatic check? No. But at the same time, they do understand. And if we due diligence, which is, our job, that's what they send us here to do, we can come up with plans and strategies that keep us out of the deep end of the pool.
I think, to Doug's point, one of those plans or strategies is, when we look at our operations right now, we don't have enough resources in place to just tread water with what we have. We're chronically short of custodians. Maintenance does the best they can. It's not for lack of any I'm not casting aspersions on anyone or any organization. It's just the reality of where we're at. And you have a very long view. I'm 2 years in. In fact, last week was 2 years. To be honest, the first 8 or 9 months, I was just trying to figure out where you kept the pens and Post-its. So really, I have about a year of practical observation and assessment. And one of the things I'm very conscious of is how frequently I make decisions I don't want to make, or decisions I know are kicking cans down the road. It's a really uncomfortable position for me to be in. And that goes to Doug's point about making sure that while we own this problem and move forward on it, we don't lose track of the fact that we still gotta, my phone rang at 4:15 this morning because the custodian wasn't gonna be here at 5. And we gotta have custodians here at 5. So there's those issues are very real as well.
Sorry, this is my wheelhouse, so I apologize if I get too weedy. So when you're talking about the like hoods and suppression systems, like, is that something you can bundle? Like, can you contract out and say, we have 4 of these, we need them all done? Like, are there opportunities?
So what I did almost immediately when I got here was I contracted out inspection. So I bundled all of them, including the tech and RC. All our hoods get inspected by 1 inch feet.
Okay,
And that's as much compliance effort as it is just the only way to wrap my head around.
sure.
Part of that inspection requirement is, and they're slow too, because they're actually a month behind because they're short-handed. Our contract with Hampshire, right?
Yeah.
So,
2 years.
and part of their contract is you do the inspection. I get an inspection report, we review it, and then they follow up with a proposal for repairs.
Okay,
So that's kind of how I approached it.
Yep.
Unfortunately, we've never had a standard for any of these issues. We've never had a standard for fire alarms or sprinkler systems or hood suppression, so we don't have I can't say I need 3 of these. I need this functionality in 3 locations. That's as close as I can come.
and would that also be an opportunity to bundle? Does that Hampshire Fire do your sprinkler and alarm as well?
They don't do our alarms, they do our sprinklers.
Okay.
And that was a choice that I made early on because, to be completely honest, I was not confident, and I'm still not, that they have the horsepower to do all.
The alarm, okay. I'm just curious
We
because
have a separate contract with another vendor for our alarm systems, and they play nice together. No, I just, in a perfect world, the easiest thing for me would have 1 entity that did it all, one call. I only wait one.
there's
person
no
up in
such
the
thing as
middle of
that.
That would be so great, but I just didn't have the confidence in it to pull it off.
I was just curious mostly with the closures, because however we rotate through the high school, if those 2 pieces are happening at the same time, that's a
So
impact wise.
So those projects are going to be distinct from our inspection and maintenance contracts. They're
Right,
gonna go out to
of
bid,
course,
and
of course.
hopefully the people we work with want to work with us and become the vendor, but there's no guarantee.
Okay,
And they might very well, if they want to keep our maintenance and inspection contract, inherit responsibility after the warranty period for someone else's installation.
would you bid those together, the fire and suppression system? Not the hoods, but not the kitchens, but
Fire and
the,
sprinkler?
yeah,
So potentially, yes. There's, it's an interesting, the fire alarm system is much more complex because of the building. The sprinkler system is bigger because we don't have sprinklers in a lot of spaces. So it's a very different, the sprinkler installation walks and talks much like new construction. Just most of the buildings is sprinkled.
okay,
The auditorium doesn't have a sprinkler system. Gym doesn't have a sprinkler system. So that's kind of like new construction. The
Yeah.
fire alarm, we have an existing system. Some of it might be reusable. A lot of it is not. So I split the engineering out so we could capture that distinction. And when I have that engineering scope, we'll make a decision about whether we put it out. And part of that decision, it's not dissimilar to putting out snow plowing. We don't want to see what kind of trucks it have, right?
sure.
So I mean, that's kind of I don't mean to be evasive about it. I just don't know until I know.
No, and the main reason I'm asking is that wherever we can capture setup costs and overhead costs are like, that's where we're not going to gain anything on equipment and materials, right? Like equipment and materials are going to cost what they cost.
Yeah.
So like what are the opportunities to like one GC that can take 3 of these, you then hopefully can gain some bandwidth on.
And that's what we've done in the past.
Yeah.
As well over time. We did, multi-million-dollar ask, you know, to.
Fix 80 things at once.
And and that's exactly what we did.
Yeah, okay.
In this-
Three schools, there were three schools that came into play, you know, and the fitness center and the BLO, all at the same time. And it was shared expense with the town.
Okay.
That, you know, so that's kind of the way to do it, and it only makes sense. We just, like you were saying, we have to stay alert to it.
Jonathan, did anybody look at the things that need to be done? How many of them would be required to be held off until summer? When they're in a session
Good
versus
question.
what on this list of things that could be done while we're in session?
So I have thought about that, and while there are some distinctions, my observation is the distinctions are not as hard and fast as people think. And my poster child is this best room project. I have not, I don't know if anybody else has, but I've not gotten a single noise complaint. I got one complaint about parking. And we've had a full-on gut run-up going on in there. It started the second week in August, and school started, classes are going on. My phone has not rung once. So I credit that largely to the understanding of the people, the abutters of that project, but also just a lot of really clear communication about this is what we're doing. It's gonna be loud these 3 days when we're firing those plates down for framing. We're using 22 caliber power actuated nails. It's gonna be really loud. We might wanna take a field trip. So
Might wanna be
my point
outside.
is, yes, that's absolutely consideration, but I think we have more flexibility than people might imagine. And if in this market, it's really, really hard to phase execution because no one will hold prices. So not that many years ago, I would have put something out to bid like this fire alarm system. And I would have said, you're gonna do it over 3 summers between, you know, pick a date, July 1st and August 30th in 3 phases. The cost escalation associated with that might be prohibitive. So I'd be more inclined to say, let's break it out in phases that make sense in terms of execution and work with the schools to play nice with the project. It's a little bit of a different paradigm, but I think it is recognition of we're in a different project and construction environment than I've ever been before. That's your experience.
Oh, yeah.
Or we
You know,
make
and the thing
arrangements.
is, having seen, you know, and gone through 30 something.
Yeah, 30 million.
Yeah, since you know, we started at least in this round of tenure, so that would be 2010, you know, in that range. And what we've seen is what you spoke about and what you're asking about. You know, there was one of the projects where they bought in a series of trailers and actually purchased the hardware that was necessary. And we just kept them stored. Remember, you know,
Yeah.
down near the bus garage? You know, we had all of that window equipment and
Yeah.
ventilation equipment for, you know, my Riverstone, you know, when they did that. And so, like you said, being creative,
There's all kinds of ways.
there's all
to do
kinds
this.
of ways to pull it off and have it function in the school. We didn't close school.
Yeah.
We
Was-
never closed school.
And the summer occupancy isn't 0, because I mean, I take my kid over to
Right.
the middle
Right,
school.
That's how much
In the
things have,
summertime.
things have changed so much, because when we did the reno at White River School, we did it in 2 summers.
Yeah,
And the cost was the same. They didn't, you know,
Yeah, that's.
so that's
Oh,
how,
that would not be
that's
the
not
case now.
possible
Yeah.
When I
nowadays.
first-
We did it 2 summers in a row and yeah,
And
had
I'd
school
rather-
in between.
I don't like seeing projects split
Mhm.
in 2s and 3s because it comes back to haunt you.
Mhm.
I'd rather, if we're going to do something, we're gonna do it and work with Jacob the dollar way to make sure if you're gonna do a sound system, you're gonna do a sound. We're not doing it in 2 pieces.
Yeah.
That's bad.
I think if nothing else, I would argue very strongly that we do the soft cost work up front. All of our engineering and design work is
Yep.
done
And that's,
before we pick up a hammer.
and that only makes sense. And I think that the board, you know, understands that, you know, our collective will and wisdom will probably bring us to that, you know, position of being able to support that direction.
This may be a Jacob question, but when you mentioned capitalization, you can't, when you're capitalizing repairs, you can't capitalize your engineering costs, but if you were like doing a new building, you can.
I'll answer the question before you die. The short.
No, I mean, I deal with this
What
all the
Jake
time, so I'm
expects.
The short
curious.
answer is, I believe not. I think in terms of budgeting, I'm kidding, I'm not gonna speak for him. But-
Yeah.
But there is a distinction between the actual cost of construction.
Okay. Because, well, maybe I'll ask Jacob now that he's back in the room. When it comes to capitalizing engineering, like soft costs and architects and stuff, if you're doing like a full project, can you capitalize those as part of the construction, or they always have to be split out?
We split out.
Okay.
So again, that's kind of part of my thinking that we should carry operational funds for that project development. Because I can, I always make the joke about nobody gives you a grant for an air handler. Nobody wants their name on it.
Right.
Fan system, ventilation system. So the projects are, it's never easy to find funding, but it's more definable. The soft costs are almost more work and we need more lead time.
So like a carry of like $50,000 every year going forward, that is just design funds that can be applied to any design project that you needed to, is that the concept? I
That's
made
the
up a number,
concept.
but
Well, I can give you some numbers. The design cost, just because this is very relevant, the design cost for the fire alarm system is just about $40,000.
Yep.
In design costs, and that's actually, if you look at that as a percentage of projected cost, that's low.
Yeah.
Because usually soft costs for commercial run around 25-30%.
Yeah.
And we're more like single digits.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit light. And then other efforts, I think we spent for the chimney, which is roughly just the chimney without the associated works, about $650,000 bite. The soft costs are about $16,000. So to give you some sense of what we would spend in a year, that's just two projects.
yeah, no, I mean, we
Yeah.
carry that, we do the same thing. So that's why I'm asking,
Yeah,
like,
so if you look at, again, why I keep pounding this idea of standardizing and district
Yeah.
standards. If we do a really good job the first time we do a restroom, we're not gonna do it right, but we'll do it right the next time.
and you can capitalize on those design costs the
Correct.
second time.
We can say, take this design and make it fit this footprint.
Mhm.
That's the thing.
I mean, we carry that. I'm just saying, like, we
Yeah.
carry an unassigned design fund in every budget that we can use for whatever is on fire.
And I have one other thing. I hate spending money on a failing horse. How many people do we have in Tiny House?
Well, 17 is
Well,
what's
it
on
depends on-
paper, but on a regular
So-
basis, it's.
So I'm waiting on that answer. It's the number I was given is the number of people who work in the program. But I can't honestly, I'm not familiar enough with the program to say how many people occupy that space and use it on a daily basis.
Oh, the reason I ask is, do we have any space anywhere else where we could move them?
Well, that's
That's
exactly
we can
what I
just
thought.
shut the door and
Yeah.
call it quits.
Right. Well, that was the exercise Jonathan was talking about with maintenance being spread out all over the district. If you consolidated maintenance, maybe you could make space for the folks from Tenny somewhere else. So we haven't been very efficient with that. Everything in the school district, it's evolved over, decades of
I
adding staff.
just
and-
really hate seeing us put another dollar in something that technically is going to come down.
That was my new construction question. Like, is this something?
So,
Yeah.
well, that's the other question, and what do you do with that question to the public? As far as need versus practical application. And in some cases, the practical application is we're better off, planning for reconstruction or
So Doug, the space allocation comment I had earlier, I think answers most directly your question. For Tenny, and sticking with that example, there's a huge difference between that same building and what we have to do to it, and what we invest over and above the base, the value of the building. There's a huge difference between forcing that building to be the home for special ed with more than 10 people, with a public facing, public use, with student use. There's a huge difference between that and putting maintenance and IT that has, 6 people, 1 restroom, no public face, no public use, no students. The requirements for the use of that building are drastically different. So that was my point about, I'm going to go through this exercise to see what would be required to use it as is. That's my assumption about no programmatic changes. But if we get to a tipping point and we say, whoa, wait a minute, we're spending more than we should, that's when the space allocation conversation happens. And we look at the options for use. Does that make sense?
So is that anytime that we get into that situation where student use comes into play, it's like we're with patient use. If it's static use, versus that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And
The forms I have to fill out are different.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And meaning that, the state, even though they're not funding a lot of any of this, the way they should. But that's a separate comment. The requirements are still there.
Right.
Yeah, the difference between a building that houses some, or, is office space for some employees and no public access or especially no student use is drastically different from, a building that has student use, especially pre-K student use. So they're like apples and oranges. So none of these are just a simple, close it or not. There are different variations. You know what I mean?
But to Kevin's
In
earlier
between.
point, I think the public appetite for, we need to construct, we're gonna move all this maintenance stuff and all these things because we need to construct a building for student use is different than we got a barn that's falling down and the foundation is bad. Do you know what I mean? Like, just kind of regardless of the money spent, the perception of we're doing something new for kids is different than the basement of this house is melting. Do you know what I mean? So like, there's also that balance as far as like, as a citizen is concerned, like, what is my money doing? Is my money throwing, what is it, bad money after good money after bad? Or is my money actually improving something at one of the properties?
That was a direct question. The election before, there were a number of taxpayers who were walking the line, when we stand up during election day, and asking that question: what am I getting from the tax dollar? And when you can clearly say that this is affecting students, and this is how it affects the students, you could see the gears turn, and the usual response was, "Oh, I didn't realize." And that's that other piece. That's just a piece for us to have to, deal with collectively.
Well, there's an opportunity there. We talked about earlier, if we need to do something with Tenny House, and we can do it in a way that enhances that program, that's the way to do it.
Yep.
Exactly.
I agree.
If it's cost neutral, all the better, right? So that's something that's not something I considered as a nuts and bolts process in creating this list, but it has to be a consideration. Otherwise, you get the criticism you just described that we're not paying attention to the program.
This is awesome. I really appreciate it.
You want to comment at all on the bigger list? I mean, I know
Sure.
you said a little,
Sure.
I don't want to get into the weeds there, but
Yeah,
I would
won't
like the
get into weeds,
board.
but what I will tell
Yeah.
you is my biggest concern with that list is when we discussed the criteria, the life safety regulatory, and then, what I call the kind of excessive cost increase liability. When I sat with that and looked at each of these issues, when we discussed it in the committee meeting, we kind of gave them equal value, and we talked about if you got 2 or more. But then when I went through the list and looked at the stuff we left off, I'm not sure we wanna put the security of the perimeter of our buildings on the same height as a roof, right? Because I can patch a leaky roof,
Mhm.
don't tell everybody for a long time. We only have to lose security once.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
So the perimeters of our buildings where we have doors, no alarms, doors that don't lock right, the interior spaces where we do not have a keying system for our interior spaces in any of the schools. Those are the ones that, yeah, it's only one check, it only checks one box, but we might want to take a
Yeah.
hard look at those and put a thumb on the scale. Does
Mhm.
that make sense?
Oh, absolutely.
And I would defer to all of you, because that is, it's not really a political decision, but it is kind of the will of the board of how important that is. And I spend enough time talking to colleagues who do what I do throughout the state and region, and even nationally sometimes, to know that we are extraordinarily fortunate in this region that we're not combating some of the complications around security that people do in other places. I have joked that, I went to school in Central Jersey in the 70s and early 80s, and our security then was much tighter than it is anywhere here. But we can't kick that can down the road defensively. And then there are things like, the roofs at Ottaqueechee and Oak Brook, which have been a problem since they were constructed, right?
Mhm.
And we're maintaining, but again, there might be, you add a couple grains to that weight because it's been a problem for so long.
Mhm.
So, this first pass was easy. It gets harder now because you're gonna have to make decisions about, if we do door alarms, we can't do door alarms at one school because why didn't we do it elsewhere?
Mhm.
If we do a security system, with the exception being the Waterloo School, which has none, but if we upgrade the security system at Ottaqueechee, we kind of have to do the other schools. You can't defend that disparity. So the exercise, Tom, to your point, it gets more difficult from this point forward because it becomes less objective.
And that's where I say, what's the magic dollar of what goes out versus what do we somehow budget in an account that Jacob creates to cover those, so that you have a certain amount of operational dollars available to address this list. Because if not, this list is just gonna hang and drag on and on and on.
So-
And 10 years from now, we'll be still talking about it.
So kind of the industry standard model, in my experience, would be you have a capital improvements budget, which is this. But hopefully, eventually, someday, capital improvements also include aspirational projects,
Right.
right? And that's where the idea we talked about, that vetting projects equally and putting them through a process of application process, a project process. We get to the point where the capital project is more dynamic than just, we got all this work to do. That is an iterative annual exercise in what is required for capital maintenance and upgrades. That's gonna happen every year, and this number's not gonna change substantially for the next 5 or 6. I think what you're talking about is, what do we do to keep from adding things to this list, right?
Well, I wanna add things to the list, but as fast as we add them, I wanna see them dropping off because they've been done, the ones that are at the top. And I'm looking at Jacob to say, it's new times. Times are changing, and somehow we have to keep up with this. And I know that the public is gonna be shocked, but if we do our due diligence and put ourselves out there so that we can talk to people and let them know what's on the list, why? I think if you stop 20 people in town and went down through the first 20 items, and they heard that there was basically a life safety code, they'd be flabbergasted. They drive in, they look at our brick buildings, it's beautiful. The problem is what's inside that exterior. And so we need to come up with a process to educate the public so that we can go forward with a bond. If we've got to increase the operating budget, by $1 million, and in order to get some of these other things off, so be it.
So being that we, are in the process of contracting, with a media firm, that is actually part of that discussion.
Yeah.
Because we're gonna need assistance, in doing that. I look around this room and everybody's got full-time, triple time, quadruple time tied up in this effort. And having someone who specializes in getting the word out and getting it out well is gonna save us all a lot of headache, so I think, our role, as, we've come to, understand is making that decision, what direction we're gonna go. And we've done this, so it's not like it's a big thing. We just need to take the data with an understanding from the people who are supporting us, being Jonathan, Jacob, and Tom, because they're vetting that all of these questions with those vendors,
That's right.
with those contractors, so that we already know that that piece is being taken care of. When they come back to us and say, okay, our best understanding would be as if we look in this direction, we should be able to accomplish that goal. Because I think we're all on the same page about the goal of where we want to be. Now we have to actualize it. And that gets to your question, what is that number? That we need to place in the budget. And what is that number that we have to bring to the taxpayers if we want to get a bond? And those sorts of things.
And we need to look at this as a forever number,
Mm.
right? Like the next 5 years are gonna be regressive. I'm gonna throw out ballparks. If we say we're gonna spend $5 million a year on capital objects, right? So we work our way through this list for the next 5 or 6 years, and we've spent our $30 million or whatever. That 5 million then converts to programmatic and improvement capital projects instead of regressive capital projects. Like that, is that what I'm hearing? Because that's
So this
really
is
good.
the way I had a conversation with a colleague at a program yesterday, and I was explaining this is, for a long time I worked in construction, I worked in commercial property project management. This is the same thing. It's a business conversation.
Mhm.
The difference is we don't have dividends, and our profit manifests in the quality of the facilities and the programs they support.
Mhm.
So at some point, like any startup, you have this period of time where you're just paying the bills, but then you start to realize a dividend where you have this funding in place, the foundation's in place, the programs are solidly supported, and then you can start to say, well, you know what are we gonna do more? What's next? And that's, we're not there yet. But I think that's the place you want to get to. And like any kind of, this is very much like an investment property. We need to make an investment to get to the point where we can make enhancements.
Yeah, but what I want to hear is that we don't say, oh, we've paid off our retrograde and
done.
stop.
No, that.
I want this figure to be for like, and I know the figure won't be forever, but I want this bucket.
Concept,
Yes, because then it starts to become a future. It starts to really benefit our kids instead of.
See,
I don't want the place to catch on fire.
See, one of the things that
Nothing's gonna catch on fire.
had occurred over this period of time, not just because of the history. Our enrollments were starting, to wane. And as the result of the last 25-year plan, that actually really cut into a lot of the problems that some of which are still, occurring because they're recurring, almost what Sarah's talking about, not having that piece in the budget where we always had your back, let's say, looking at your part of this. So what we have seen And if you look at the numbers, there was this dip in enrollment. And as we started to move forward and the spending was clear, our numbers started to go up again. Okay? And we were drawing more students because of the work we were doing. And in schools, there is a corollary to that. You know, if you've got the not just the will, but you've got the space, and it's space that's attractive in this sense. What I mean, attracting students in that sense. When the parents come for the visit and they go, "Wow," and they hear the program, and then they do a double wow, they come. And we've seen that, you know, like over time. So it is a protection of the investment. And we've got a lot of infrastructure that, you know, we have to protect, you know, so it only makes sense. We just have to have the tough discussion.
And he took out the caveat on growth, but I mean, the housing projects planned
Oh, yeah.
in the
there's
next 5
three.
years are going to impact us.
Well, there's anytime that you have new people coming in, and we're a people organization.
Yeah.
When kids come, you know, those numbers affect us directly.
I think that's why this has to be an annual.
Yeah.
Because
Exactly.
the numbers are gonna change, but expectations are gonna change. When I looked at the mechanical system in the middle school, and I made this point, I looked at it as the middle school, being the middle school as it stands today.
Mhm.
I'm thinking in not too long, the expectation is gonna be new facilities, renovated facilities that are air conditioning. That's a whole different thing.
Mhm.
And if we put more people in that space and we need more flex space and all these things, but that's why I think, you know, to your point, the numbers have to be strong and be steady. But, you know, it's the old, like the adage from years ago about you don't make your money with your hammer, you make money on the choice of what you hit. Right? That's kind of where we're at.
Yeah. We've batted this around before, but you know, I think what the board really needs to consider this year is, you know, what do you want to do in terms of you know, the operating budget versus a bond? Because if you're going to do a bond for $5 million to pay for this first phase of, then how are you going to do it again next year? How are you going to do it again the year after? That's going to be quite a burden. But if you're trying to add a reasonable or a large dollar amount to the operating budget, you know, if you can justify that, that's going to be much more sustainable and do what, you know, Sarah and Coach were talking about. But that's a big add. And
Yep.
who knows what the budget's going to look like this year. I would argue that we've never had enough in the maintenance and the facilities budget. We've done what we could. Last year, we did push it up. And then, you know, in the last minute, trying to come up with a reasonable budget increase, we cut, I think, 500,000. Yeah. Two, you know, because it was coming off of COVID and we were sort of in a different time. So that's one of the big things the board needs to grapple with, or we all need to grapple with, is.
Well, see, that's where I think the board needs to get out and be seen, because we do need to tell the population the bond that we're asking for this year, it's not gonna stop. There's gonna be a need next year and the year after, and I can't tell after that, but this is not gonna go away. It's got to be addressed.
Perhaps if you're talking about bond, you talk about a bigger number.
Well, that was my question. Is there a way to slowly adjust these, right? So you ask for an initial $8 million, but you also up the operating with the plan that the operating capital budget is going to go up by 10% every, like, or 20, whatever the number is, until we reach a place where we can finish this list and do programmatic things. Like clearly the arts area needs love, right? That's not life safety. So, but that's sellable, right? The drama department is sellable, where a basement and the catacombs are not. So how do you look at selling something big, a one-time big thing in order to make a slower adjustment to that ongoing thing? And then of course we would fundraise for a new performing arts center, or we would fundraise for something that's flashy because people would do that. But like, is that an option?
Oh,
Like,
absolutely.
to
Pretty
do a
much
big
anything, any
bond, but
cost.
make the commitment that we're gonna do a different model on this over time.
The thing is, we've approached it similar in the past. And as boards change, that philosophy changes. But I think that in the times that we're living in right now, there's always this, like when I need to bring somebody, like back to earth, I'll say, think of one of our northern schools that just bonded $200 million to rebuild a school.
Yeah.
And that's all I have to say, and I don't name names, I just say, and I know you've seen it in the news, because every time it comes on the news, it's every 5 minutes.
Right. Yeah.
We don't want to be there. Hartford does not want to be there. If we do a good job coming up with our planning and program, we won't go there. So anyway. So, again, Jonathan, thank you. So
Yes.
much. We know this isn't easy, and you as well, Jacob. Thank you so much, and Tom. Is this having all of us have gone through it, one way or another, through our work or through the district, and, we know what's involved. So there's a lot of thanks and gratitude that goes out to you guys. We need to continue this discussion, and we'll keep it on the agenda, because we're in budget cycle anyway. So that's a big growing area that has to be addressed as we continue our budget discussions. So.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate the clarity of where we're at. So we finally have the information we need to make some of the decisions that have been sort of plaguing us. So
next
Kudos
steps
to-
wise, that's just part that this is the top one of the considerations when we move into the actual budget construction. Okay.
Jacob,
What do you think?
being that you've been sitting there digesting all of this.
I have a lot of number crunching.
Right.
Well, none of this is news. We talked about it.
No, and the thing is, knowing how organization works, I understand that. I guess one of the questions that one of the first things we usually do, in those initial budget meetings, is look at our balance sheet for the end of the last fiscal year. Take a very hard look, at our numbers. The October numbers are in, so we should know. There's a problem with our funding cycle in that it is so convoluted that we wait for the state to get our final numbers so we know what our appropriate costs are, because that's really what gives us that discussion point around this is how much we have. Now it's up to us as the board to decide, right? But if Jacob and Tom can't even give us a number because of this other variable, there's a lot of extrapolation. And thank goodness they've been doing it long enough that their numbers have been really, really good. As far as for us doing planning. So thank you all, again, and the real work starts at the next meeting. well, actually.
Yeah. Really is the next meeting, yeah.
So,
All right,
but
I
if you
looked,
have anything that you'd like to share with some of our, newer board members about the process.
Usually, um, by late October, we're pretty well settled as far as like the first draft of the budget. Obviously, this year with, doing software implementation, things have been a little bit delayed, but I'm trying to make up for lost time here to meet with principals and, get everyone's wish list together basically for that first draft. And certainly, as the numbers start to roll in from the state, as far as, okay, what's your census block grant number gonna look like? What are some of the, draft yields as far as, first draft? CLA is always the last one we get, which is probably the most important
Mhm.
at the end of December. It's always a little bit crazy because you're really like reverse budgeting as far as, here's what I want, here's what I need. And I'm hoping at the end that the numbers are gonna align with what I need to get this number.
Mhm.
So it's always a little bit crazy, but we've been doing it long enough where we know how to roll with it. And, sometimes we're doing a full rebuild of the budget within a week, and it gets a little crazy, but we get it done.
So,
Yeah.
the work continues next meeting.
Excellent.
I checked, there is no one in the public on Zoom.
So I guess being that we're at this inflection point, what we could do is we do have 2 executive sessions coming. So being that we have people that we would want to invite into the executive session, being Nelson, Jonathan, and Jacob, we'd have that executive session first, and then we'll do the evaluation of an employee session after that. And we'll just record when we come out into each of those. Because I think for clarity's sake, we've spent a lot of time with the Secretary of State in the last couple of weeks. So clarity of the breaks is important for an open meeting.
We've got just a couple little business items. Yeah. They'll be quick, I think.
So really the reason I'm here tonight is because I would like to ask for your approval to request a P card or a purchasing card. We have 2 district credit cards right now. One is in Tom's name through Citizens and one is in my name through Capital One. We're continually running into issues with our balance maxing out. We have plane tickets or whatever that goes on the card, and within a week we're maxing out. So we really need a card with a higher balance, and the other benefit is that it's in the district's name, not mine or Tom's name. So I've talked with my constituents at the business managers, and there's actually a program through the Bank of Montreal that deals with the purchasing cards. It's through the International Association of School Business Officials, and all the feedback that my constituents that actually use it, everyone's like, it's a lot of work to set up, but it works great, and we've never maxed out our balance yet. So with that, I would like to ask for your approval to be able to apply for the credit card.
Prior to that ask, Jacob had mentioned that to me, I did reach out to some legislative contacts as well. And I think it is the safest, and best direction for us to go as a district. So I personally would support.
I've reached out to some people and I agree. It made a lot of sense to me. Make a motion. Okay, I make a motion that we approve Jacob's request to get this purchasing card, is that what it's called? I'm sorry, I forgot where from.
It's through the IASA.
Okay, then that's my motion.
I'll second.
The International Association of School Business
Thank
Managers.
you. There's a second.
I second.
Oh, okay.
So we have a motion and a second to accept the request from our chief financial officer to this move. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So moved.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Jake. This will be a big improvement, because
Yeah.
right now it's like
Oh,
a
man. You know,
nightmare.
those phone calls, coach, we gotta get this done.
Yeah.
You know. Fun.
There is one teacher appointment. The White River School would like to hire Yannick Oni as a STEM place-based educator with Title IV grant funds. So pretty excited that we were able to find her. Other than that's it. I guess since you did them separate, you'd have to have a separate
Separate motion.
motion for that one. When coach is ready, sorry.
Okay.
So there's one teacher appointment.
I make a motion that we give Tom permission to hire this person or ever how they're supposed to be wording this one. I'm not quite sure on this one. Peter always makes these for us. I do make a motion that we hire this person to come in.
That's what we need.
Okay, there you go.
I'll second.
So we have a motion and a second to accept the request from the superintendent to make this hire. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So moved.
Thank you.
I do not have the wording for the.
Encourage teacher.
Okay.
Can we do a 5-minute break before we go?
Oh,
to
yeah, well,
executive
that was gonna be the hope. You know, once we go
session?
into executive session, because things have to break down anyways.
Yeah.
You know, we'll request a motion to go into the first executive session. And I'll make the motion just to make it a little easier. I'd like to make a motion that we go into executive session to discuss a real estate matter under 1 VSA 313A2.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. And that session would
Yeah.
include the three of you.
And give us a 10-minute break or a 5-minute break to go to the
Through the
pod.
bathroom.
Yeah.
4060
You can take off.
0604.